Greetings, embers, newbies, and the peekaboos. Welcome to Back to Ashes. I am your host, Phoenix. For those of you who have never visited the channel before and you begin to love what you are hearing, please join our family by hitting that subscribe button and changing your bell notification to all. That way you don't miss an uploaded video. And also, I'd like to take a moment and give credit to our elite members of Back to Ashes. Thank you all so much for your continued support, for you are the pillars of which this channel stands. Thank you. Without further ado, it is time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Creepy Encounters. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. Disclaimer, this video is for educational and entertainment purposes. Every time I go into a local coffee shop, a barista greets every customer with a soft, high-pitched voice and a calming demeanor. But when I get to the front of the line, he recognizes me, bows his chin into his chest, beams up at me with a closed-lipped smile, and greets me like greeting his niece or close friend. The thing is, we've only met like a couple of times, and he talks to me different to the other customers. The best way I can describe it is like he's talking to a little girl in a candy store, even though I'm in my 20s. It's not just a flamboyantly gay thing. It seems abnormal, only because it's just so over the top. And one day, I said, "Oh, hi," and he was stone-faced. He didn't smile, and he said things have been tough, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." It seemed bipolar, but it was honestly really scary because before this encounter, he was always so gleeful in an alarming type of way. It disturbed me, to be honest. And the worst part is I keep thinking about him. I genuinely get nightmares about this guy and avoid going to that coffee shop now. I don't know why he scares me so much, but he just does. I feel like he's going to follow me and possibly try to kill me. I've never had such a guttural bad feeling about a human. I don't mean to sound insensitive to mental illness, but it's like he targets me when he sees me in line and seems kind of obsessed with me, if you know what I mean. As a young woman, I think I just get scared about stalking. So, I lived in an apartment, and this older lady who used to live right above me moved out. Then, a very humble family moved into her place. A simple elderly couple, their 25-year-old daughter and their 15-year-old son. At first, everything was fine. I've never really socialized much with the building's community. So, I just greet them whenever we cross paths in the hallway. The 15-year-old boy, though, always seemed super shy. Every time I said hi, it was obvious he felt uncomfortable with the interaction. The first 3 months were chill, but out of nowhere, the boy started screaming all day. Since their apartment is directly above mine, I could hear everything. At first, I thought it was just him raging over an online game, but it wasn't the usual cursing. He'd just yell, "Ah," with the occasional "no" or random swear word. Around that time, my grandmother was really sick, and one day I got so frustrated that I yelled back at him to shut up. Surprisingly, it worked for a bit, and he stopped yelling. Later on, my grandmother passed away, and honestly, his yelling stopped bothering me. I started wearing headphones most of the time to play games or study, so I barely noticed it. The yelling became rare anyway, every now and then, but nothing major. But recently, the screaming has come back in full force. Again, I didn't really care much because I wear headphones all day and barely hear it. Still, I found it weird because whenever I saw him in the hallway, he seemed normal. Shy, but normal. I figured it was just a teenager raging over a game kind of thing. Then, yesterday, something strange happened. My mom was waiting for a package, and the delivery guy accidentally buzzed their apartment instead of ours. My mom went downstairs to get it, but the intercom kept ringing. The boy answered, but instead of asking if someone was there or saying hello, he just started moaning into the intercom. Not a joking, playful moan, but more like a mixture of yelling, growling, and sounding like he was in dire pain. It freaked out both the delivery guy and my mom. I think he might have schizophrenia or something, and sometimes he has episodes. What's confusing is that he seems to have a normal life. He has a girlfriend, friends, a social life. Should I be worried? Has anyone dealt with someone like this before? Personally, I'm not too concerned since I'll be moving out in a month for college, but I'm a little worried about my family who's staying here. I'm going to go ahead and write this so hopefully no one else has to deal with this flea of a human. It's going to be a wild ride, so grab your popcorn and get comfy. So, back in June of 2022, I met Wilton Wallace on Hinge. I'm from Victoria, Australia. He was from Queensland, but was working in Victoria and was 28 at the time. I was 24. We hit it off, and within a day of chatting, he asked to meet me in the city for drinks. He seemed friendly and cute, so why not get dressed up and give him a chance? Funnily enough, my spidey senses were tingling already, but I just thought it was usual nerves of a first date. I should have trusted my gut, but he hadn't given me any red flags as of yet. He met me at Flinders Street Station. First impression was he dressed really nice, suit and a long coat. Clearly took pride in his looks. Instantly, he was super affectionate, way more than I'm used to. He kissed my cheek, picked me up, squeezed the crap out of me, and we were hand in hand from the get-go. Although I was taken aback, he was of Brazilian descent, and I know their culture can be quite forward. I wasn't overly alarmed, but this was within 10 seconds of meeting. So we decide to go for drinks, and he recommends a very well-known fancy bar. I'm just a nurse, so way above my pay grade. But he said he would like to cover the entire night. It became apparent very quickly he's super chivalrous, charming, and a sweet talker. It felt like a soppy 2000s rom-com, I can't lie. He was super open about his life, and because he was, so was I. We had so much in common and everything, so it just felt right. It makes me want to gag now I know the real him. If it feels too good to be true, it probably is. Basically, the life story he threw up all over me was that he was born in Brazil. His parents had a family business and were well off, but lost it somehow. Think he said his dad died? Rest in peace to his dad. His mom couldn't afford to take care of him and his 4 sisters alone, so she gave him up for adoption, and he moved to Portugal. I guess he was the runt of the litter because she kept the 4 girls. So he grew up in Portugal from about 5 until he was 17, when he decided to move back to his biological mother. He said his Portuguese family were lovely but incredibly religious, and he didn't like the constraints. Arranged marriage. No boinking before marriage type of deal. So at 17, he moves back to Brazil and builds his relationship with his biological mother, and eventually he decided to move to Australia. He moved over to study for some aerodynamic bullshit degree or some career I don't give a flying fuck about. Fast forward 11 years to 2022, and now he works in Queensland as some manager for shipping companies and flies to and from Melbourne for work every few weeks. Now that you're up to speed with that crock of shit, let's get back to the date. I had a traumatic upbringing, neglect, poverty, raised by grandparents, and so on. So hearing all of that really touched me. The man had me in the palm of his slimy hands. I felt at times he was cocky and had an ego on him, but he even mentioned he can come across cocky, and rest assured me that's how some people perceive him, but he's not at all. So clearly someone's pulled him for being an arrogant twat before. The date is progressing and we're having huge DNMS. He was ticking so many boxes. We spoke about how I love to dance and always wanted to learn salsa, so he suggested a studio that does weekend night classes, but it had sold out. So he asked if I'd go back to his place, just to hang out. I don't know what this man put in my drink, not literally, just FYI, but my common sense was gone. I told him I needed to go home before midnight and was only coming over to talk. Anyway, we get to his apartment and like the scene from Crazy Stupid Love, he lights candles, puts on salsa music, pours a heavy glass of red for us, and asks if he can teach me how to salsa in his tiny living room. Like, was I Kate Hudson and How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days? I oblige because my fanny flutters are in full control of my functioning at this point. We end up making out and things get hot and heavy, but I stuck to my guns and didn't let him pass my chastity belt. Don't get me wrong, I've had one-night stands before, but I had turned a new leaf and my rule was now 3 dates minimum. Long story short, but not short at all, we ended up falling asleep together and I was fully clothed. How about that? We woke up the next morning and he took me out for breakfast before ordering me an Uber home. Keep in mind, that was the one and only time I physically met him, and it was PG rated. A few days later, things were getting weird. He started making grandiose gestures and love bombing. Without asking me, he bought me lingerie. He didn't know my size and had never seen me in lingerie. He bought me jewelry for my birthday, just 1 week after we met, and then the grand prize, an all-inclusive holiday to Queensland. I said yes because you only live once, right? Like literally, I might die, but at least my tombstone would say I was living my best life. He told me on the trip we'd go to private restaurants that his friend owns, a helicopter ride, and a cruise on a yacht, amongst a bunch of other completely insane things. He paid for the flights and told me not to bring lingerie because he had that covered. Gag. My red flag alarms were going off at this point. Like, is he a sugar daddy, or am I about to be trafficked in lingerie and jewelry he just bought me? Think about it. Dude works for a shipping company. Perfect way to ship me off to the market. So, at this point, my stomach is turning and I'm getting sus. I realized I hadn't really done much digging on him, and if I was going interstate with this schmoozy wet sock, I needed to know everything. I spent hours with my housemate investigating. His Facebook was a total lockdown. This was before you could lock your profile. And his Insta had no signs of family. He barely had any tagged photos with people, and the photos he did have were from years ago in Brazil. All the photos he had were just him, solo and traveling. So I started questioning everything. Was his name even Wilton Wallace? Doesn't sound Brazilian or Portuguese. Sounds more like Donald Duck or Chuck E. Cheese to me. So we searched his number on my bank app using PayID. Lo and behold, W. Viga dos Santos comes up. Change for anonymity. I'm shitting bricks now. Like, who the fuck is this toenail I've been wasting my time with? So I go deeper. I'm going through all of his Insta followers looking for any remnants of him. I find a mutual in the deep, dark cave I've got myself into, and there it is. A group photo of him from around 2016, holding a Brazilian woman that looks about 35, and the comments mention, "Love you both, can't wait to see you two again." I couldn't confirm if they were married, but that's where my money was. I dig more and more to find who she is. I can't find anything, but I had a lead on what her name might be, so I had to Google and search both her name and his Viga dos Summa fucking liar name. After sitting through countless pages, I can't read because they're in Spanish and poorly translated. I find a settlement document. It was a civil dispute about a debt, but both their full names were there. To my delight, his full name in the case was Wilton Wallace Viga dos Santos. I don't blame him for going by the easiest of the 5 names, but one truth doesn't fix a truck of lies. So now I'm thinking I've gone mad and overthinking. Maybe he's just divorced and doesn't post a lot? Nope. Whilst doing our investigations, I asked him to send his passport so my friends had his details when I went to Queensland, just to be safe. He sends me his passport after hours of waiting, and he had blacked out info and covered his face. Dumb fuck didn't cover his date of birth. Well enough, though, because, would you look at that? This absolute toad was born in 1986, making him 36 years of age. Now, I saw through this bullshit, but I wanted to flip the game for a little while. I had to do it, for the plot. I confronted him about it. He made up some shit about how when he was registered in Portugal, they muffed up the date. Didn't know a 5-year-old could look 13, but there you have it. Over the next few weeks, he kept canceling and changing Queensland planned days before each rescheduled flight. There was always another issue. I went along with it. I had no intentions of going, but wanted to see his cunning plot come to fruition. Maybe it wasn't trafficking. Maybe he was going to magically lose all of his money and get cancer and need my help to survive. And then I get a message that broke the camel's back. His grandma in Portugal was sick, so he had to fly there ASAP. I literally laughed when I read it. I was super short and apathetic with him. Next day, Grandma died of a stroke. Boo-hoo. Some may think my digging went a bit too far at this point, but I ended up messaging the woman from the Insta photo and a legal document because I just had a horrible gut feeling there was more to all of this, and I was sick of the games. It definitely felt like I was crossing a line, but I had to know. She ended up messaging me back that she unfortunately didn't know him and wanted to tell me everything over the phone. What she told me blew my fucking mind. Excuse my language, but this cunt was the biggest narcissistic, pathological, lying, cheating scumbag I had ever had the displeasure of knowing. He had lied about it all. He was 36, born and raised by his mom and dad in Brazil his entire life. He had brothers, not 4 sisters. He never lived in Portugal. Grandma was still alive and kicking. He started social work, and was now studying to become a physiotherapist. Nothing to do with Aereo, whatever the fuck it was. I don't even know what the shipping container place has to do with any of it, but he'd send me Insta stories of him working there, so that's actually scary. He was the same charming, suave man to his ex-wife, who he married in Brazil, and they moved to Queensland shortly after. As soon as they arrived, he became financially and emotionally abusive towards her and refused to get a job. She worked and paid for the bills. His social work degree, random business trips, and whatever else the scumbag pretended he did. Side note, please do not try and find her. She would like to remain anonymous, as she is scared of her ex-husband and what he is capable of. After being in Queensland for 5 years, she got a message from a 24-year-old Australian girl, same age I was at the time, and it turned out they'd been dating for 3 years. They met at uni, and he'd been using her to do all of his university work. She was told the same life story as me, but the poor thing never questioned it. She believed the crap about his age, too. She realized through a mutual uni friend that saw a photo of him and said she thought he was married. Thank fuck for that friend. So Wilton and his wife got divorced, and the 24-year-old kicks him to the curb. But only a year later, another girl reaches out to his now ex-wife. Same story. 24-year-old Australian girl. Told the same bullshit life story and believed it. They'd been together 4 years, and he was using her to pay for his lifestyle and clothes. 2 years go by. His ex-wife just hoped he had finally come to his senses, but afraid not. I was the third girl to reach out to her. My guess is he still got a few girls on the go at a time. His plans probably kept changing because of them, and one of them probably pays for his plane trips every few weeks. Fuck. The holiday, jewelry, and lingerie was probably some other woman's hard-earned money as well. Needless to say, I was furious. I ended up ghosting him because that's the best way to piss off a narcissist. He messaged me for weeks on text, Insta, WhatsApp, and Facebook. Eventually, I decided to give him a taste of his own medicine. I told him I knew some things and he needed to come clean. I never mentioned what or how I knew, but he said he'd be fully transparent and fly down to Melbourne to see me. He probably thought I knew 1% of the truth. I thought about actually seeing him and seeing what bullshit he'd come up with next, but I was done. I told him I was about 5 hours from the city, in a town that's so small there's only one train to get there a day. I said I couldn't pick him up from the airport, but he could stay a few days. I'd show him the real Australian country, and I'd drive him back to the airport at the end of his visit. So after catching a 2.5-hour flight and sitting on a train for 5 hours to go to the middle of nowhere, I asked him to send a photo of where he was so I could find him. He actually done it. I was at home in my pajamas watching a movie, and he was at a train station in the rain, 5 fucking hours away from the airport, and stuck until the next day. Pure gold. I can only imagine how pissed he would have been. I sent him a message I had ready and waiting for that exact moment. I waited for a reply so I knew he got it. Then blocked the piece of shit on everything and never looked back. So, there you go. Stay safe out there and always trust your instincts. Years ago, I posted this on a Melbourne forum, and unfortunately, there were a lot of girls that had met him online or for a date, but thankfully, they all got the same vibes as me before it went too far. However, I was the only one crazy enough to find out who the scumbag really was. I just hope he hasn't been able to trick anymore since my run in with him. And if they have been, I hope they find out the truth. If you somehow find this asshole on the streets or online, do as you please. Just please don't contact his ex-wife for her protection. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. When I was about 19, I was on all kinds of dating apps because I had low self-esteem and a real desire for connection. One day, I got a message on OkCupid from this guy. We'll just call him Brent. Brent had a lot of shared interests with me, video games and other nerdy hobbies, and seemed like a nice enough guy. So I decided to agree and meet for a date. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him in my mind, so I just assumed it was the result of us living in a decently small city at the time. The day of our date came and I got ready, making sure I looked presentable but not overdressed since he was taking me to Red Lobster. We were in college, so it didn't seem like that bad of a choice for two broke kids on a first date. When he showed up, though, he looked visibly dirty and much less well-groomed than any of his photos. Not one to judge, I wrote it off and tried to give the date a real chance. Then came strike number 2. When I went to order chicken, not being a fan of seafood, he made a big public show of frustration. He was insistent that I should have ordered seafood since he specifically took us to a seafood restaurant. I explained I didn't like seafood and tried to de-escalate the conversation. Obviously, from then on, the date was very awkward, but I was sure he felt mutually turned off, given his outburst, and assumed when it was over we would part our ways pretty quickly. How wrong I was. Instead, he walked me back to my car, suddenly very invested again in trying to maintain subtle physical contact with me, and acted as if we had just had the most wonderful evening. He kept making moves to kiss me, which I somehow avoided, and eventually I managed to end the evening with a very awkward and prolonged series of goodbyes. As soon as I got home, I had many, many texts waiting for me. I assumed he was going to be bitter about the seafood again or something, but instead it was a very passionate profession of feelings for me. He waxed poetic about how perfect we were for one another and how he couldn't wait for another date. I ignored his messages and went to bed, wanting to talk to my roommate in the morning about what to do. I was obviously not interested in pursuing him, but felt cruel just blocking him outright. I probably should have. It's what my roommate suggested. He began texting daily over the next couple of days, expressing how we were statistically perfect for each other, based on some quiz on the site where we had met. And he believed wholeheartedly we were logistically ideal as a match. I tried gently letting him down, but he laughed it off and said he would help me understand someday. I really should have blocked him by then, but I am very much a pushover, even more so at that age. During one such conversation about our supposedly inevitably future, he texted me that he was outside. Then I heard knocking on my bedroom window. I absolutely panicked. I responded to ask what he was doing, and he confessed very casually that he worked at my apartment complex doing maintenance and janitorial tasks. That is where I recognized him. I realized too late. As it turns out, he had recognized me from the moment he sent his message and told me he had always known we would be together. That's right. The date didn't turn into him stalking me. He already had been. I lost my cool and sent him a very long message full of venom and threats of what I would do if he didn't leave me alone. And of course it didn't work. He told me I was being silly and would come to understand soon. He told me it was inevitable and I was just being stubborn. He acted like I was denying the existence of gravity. He was so overly affectionate and so condescending regarding my refusals. Of course, I blocked his number, but that only resulted in him coming to my window more regularly. I should have done this much sooner, but I eventually contacted my landlord. I did not contact the police as I felt at the time it wasn't bad enough to do so. Thankfully, the talk with my landlord slowed his activity significantly, and I moved not long after. Nothing more came of it, and it's been over 10 years. So, I'm glad that my stalker date finally ended. This happened over 10 years ago, but I still think about how close I came to dying. I was already with my future husband when I met his cousin. We had a lot in common. We'd both struggled with addiction and anorexia. We'd talk on the phone and met up to eat and see a movie, but he kissed me in his car, so I decided it was best if we stopped talking. I told my future husband about the kiss and he was understanding. I didn't tell him that his cousin got extremely upset over me turning him down. Some time passed and we started meeting up as friends. Since we were both starving ourselves, we always went to the same place, but after a couple of times, I felt like it wasn't healthy for either of us to meet up. He asked me to meet up one last time and I stupidly said yes. We went to our place and during dinner, he was talking about his apartment and job, how happy he could make me. I got uncomfortable and asked him to drive me home. It was really late, and instead of driving me home, he drove by to the forest preserve. It was pitch black because all the lights were off. I immediately felt uneasy. We were alone in the parking lot, and I had a horrible feeling at this point that something was going to happen. He parked and turned off his car, then looked at me and said we were meant for each other. I didn't want to upset him, so I just said that he knew I was engaged and that we were just friends. He had a history of violence, so I was actually terrified. He started getting really upset and almost crying. He said that he loved me. Then he put his arm around my neck and held his arm down really hard on the right side of my neck. His arm was around my neck and I'd been looking straight ahead when suddenly I woke up to a police officer at his window. He was asking if I was okay. I was really scared and confused. I had some vomit on my shirt and I'd wet my pants. He'd pressed down on my carotid artery for long enough that it knocked me out. He was a wrestler in high school. He was telling the officer we were fine and that I was drunk. He got a ticket, but I was too afraid to say anything because if he was arrested, my now husband's family wouldn't have blamed me, but that's what I thought. I said I was fine, but that I wanted to go home now. I thought if I said it in front of the officer, he would drive me home because he took our names and he wouldn't risk trying something else. So he drove me home and didn't say anything. I don't know if he was trying to kill me or just got so upset he went way overboard. Regardless, he almost did kill me, and it really fucked me up. A person doesn't vomit and wet themselves after a neck compression unless they almost died. I told my now husband, but not right away because I felt it was partly my fault for meeting up with him. I only saw him a couple more times at holidays, and then he stopped coming. But he didn't dare speak to me after what he did. If that officer hadn't shown up, I don't know if I would still be here today. Surprisingly, this is one of those stories I forgot about until a few days ago when I was talking to a school friend on call, and I got reminded of this. She was pretty freaked out when I told her, so here I am to tell you. This happened when I was roughly maybe 7 or 8, so some of the details are fuzzy, but I remember it pretty vividly. This may seem like unimportant context, but my family had just moved to America and were renting the top portion of your regular suburban house in a pretty safe cul-de-sac. I had friends, they were triplets, about 3 or 4 houses down, not far at all. Every day I'd go hang out with them, and at around 9 or 10 at night, my older brother, around 11 or 12 I'd say, would make the 2-minute walk and come get me and walk me home since I was pretty young. One night, he came and got me as usual. The sun wasn't fully down, but it was getting pretty dark. We started down the walk as normal, when he started casting glances over his shoulder. I didn't really notice until he shoved me hard away from the sidewalk in between 2 houses. Each house had a huge fence that separated their backyard. Not ours, though. And he made me crouch behind the fence. I remember being really scared, but more so confused, since I had no damn idea what the hell was going on. More specifically, he was a pretty big prankster. Once he convinced me my oldest sister crashed her car into the ocean. So I didn't really believe him when he turned and said, "Walk behind the houses. I think someone's following us." Looking back now, he was probably trying to keep me calm. However, whatever calm was left in my tiny 8-year-old body was gone the moment I turned around and looked. The man had followed us behind the houses, and he was just by the edge of a few houses down near a different fence line. He had a black hoodie on, with the hood up, black sweatpants, and white sneakers. I have pretty bad eyesight now due to some health problems, but back then it was crystal clear, and I could see with horrifying clarity that his jaw was hung open, like he was just standing there, with his jaw hung open. It was horrifying. I think now that I'm older, maybe he had some kind of medical condition that affected his jaw. Or maybe he did crack. I don't know. But back then, I could have sworn on God I was seeing some kind of demon. Anyway, my brother, when he saw me looking and getting ready to freak out, told me to just run as fast as I can to our house. We booked it. Neither of us looked back, but we were scared out of our minds. Like I said, we only rented the top portion of the house, so the bottom, with the sliding door in the backyard, belonged to the other tenant. I don't remember if she was home or not, but I remember tugging that thing open and locking it as fast as I can. And when I looked up, he was there in the yard, a little way away from the door, staring at us. Me and my brother told my sister and my mother immediately. My father was away on work on a trip during this time, but nothing came of it. Not until the day after. We went to go meet my dad at his warehouse. which had a small live-in portion above it where we lazed around until he was ready to head home with us. Around dusk, he came up and told us we might have to wait since the police were here. He walked us around the back window of the small area to show us police all around the backyard area of the warehouses. There's a few in a line, to a white van parked on the grass by the edge of the woods. Like I said, I was pretty young, so I don't remember many details of what actually happened. But I do remember my dad, who hadn't been told about the day prior, telling us that they found a man and a woman in the van. The man, he said, had his mouth hung wide open. He seemed really disturbed telling me about the whole thing and wouldn't answer any more questions about the woman. Maybe she was dead. I've got zero idea. I do know they were arrested on trespassing charges. I don't know anything else, and I haven't asked about it, and I doubt he'd remember. It's been over a decade and he's pushing 70. But it freaks me out to this day. I still can't believe it happened, and I don't have any answers for it. I talked to my brother briefly about it in hopes he remembered more than I do. But all I got was a long tirade about whatever medical condition the guy probably had for his mouth to be like that. He's an annoying medical student now. Sometimes I think maybe he didn't mean any harm and was just drugged out of his mind. But this was like in the world's safest neighborhood, and doesn't explain why or how he showed up at my dad's workplace. When I just finished college, I was living in a one-bedroom townhouse split. I met a guy on Plenty of Fish at that time. I wasn't exactly smart about my online digital footprint. Not like I've really changed, but at least now I'm not as ridiculous. Anyways, he seemed like a decent guy. He was really good looking, said he had a good job, nice teeth. Don't judge me. And looked like he cared about his personal health. All things I would typically look for in a guy. I'm not a shallow human, but I like to be presentable, and if I'm with someone, I would like them to care about being presentable in a business environment also. After about a week of chatting online, we agreed to meet. We met at a restaurant downtown, which was really far from where I lived. When I got there, I noticed him standing at the door. We sat down to eat, and the evening went great. At the end of the date, we said goodbye, and I got into my car and began to drive away. I realized right away that he was following me because of the distance to my house. I wasn't immediately scared because it's a big city. Maybe he'll turn off on the freeway. He didn't. My exit was coming up, and I decided not to take it. I kept driving. I circled the entire city on the freeway, and he stayed right behind me. I was starting to panic a bit, so I decided to go to my friend's house instead of mine. And when I pulled out on the exit, I noticed he didn't. So I had a little bit of a moment to breathe and decided, okay, screw it. I'll just go home. I took the off-ramp back onto the freeway and began going back to my exit. I got home and showered and was getting ready for bed. And I started feeling dumb because, was that really him? Am I overreacting? Do I ask him if he was following me? Just a number of things were racing through my overactive imagination. Or so I thought. I decided I was going to message him and just say, had a good time, good night. And then I started typing. All of a sudden, a message comes through on my phone of a picture of my car outside of my house. I nearly died. My heart jumped out of my chest. I started shaking. I didn't know what to say, and he texts me saying, "I didn't know you lived across the street from me." I've met my neighbors, and not once have I ever met him. There's a huge apartment complex, kitty corner to my townhouse, so maybe that's where he lived? I don't know. I popped up and went to look outside, and there he was, standing there outside like he was waiting for me. I opened the door and he asked if he could come in and if I wanted to still hang out. I told him I was exhausted and I'd rather just crash out as it had been a long day. The next morning, I woke up to go to work and my windshield had been smashed. My car was keyed. My back two tires were slashed. And as I was noticing the damage to my vehicle, the guy comes out of his car with 2 coffees and is like, "Oh, I thought I'd surprise you with a morning coffee." So again, I'm really freaked out. I called the cops and reported the damage to my vehicle. This guy offered to drive me, and something in my gut was like, "Don't get in that car." So I called my boss, told them the situation, and explained I wasn't going to be there until after the police came. This guy just hung out the entire time, by the way. When the police finally got there, this guy was acting really suspicious. He walked away and was like hiding on the other side of his car. I filed the report. The police basically said, "Hope you have insurance," and were on their way to leave. They pulled around the corner, and all I heard were the sirens on the cops' lights turn on, and the cops scream, "Freeze! Put your hands in the air and get down on your knees." I look, and the cops have their guns drawn at this guy, and this dude's like on the ground getting arrested. I spoke with a cop after he got into the back, and he explained he was wanted for stalking, breach of probation, assault with a deadly weapon, fraud, and aggravated sexual assault. I was shook. It took me a couple of days to get over the hypothetical situations that could have happened. About a week later, I was on my way out the door to work, and guess who was sitting in my driveway? We live in Canada, so essentially you're released on conditions until you go to jail. I told him I was late for work, but that I'd call him when I was done with work. I never went to work that day. I went and found a new apartment on another area of the city. I also changed my phone number and hired my friend's husband and his friends to go pack my apartment up and move it to their place for a month, and then move into my new place because I was so scared this dude would follow me while moving. So that's my horror story for the first time I ever used plenty of fish. Last night, after my wife picked me up from work, we headed over to Walmart to grab a few things before returning home. We were discussing what we wanted to get for snacks in the chip aisle. I was being indecisive as usual, when some random guy leaving the aisle decided to chirp in with, "That's why you shouldn't shop when you're hungry." We laughed politely and agreed in a way that I thought was passive enough not to continue conversation. But apparently he had other plans. My wife, not paying any attention, wandered off to look at popcorn, and this is where things took a strange turn. I keep telling them it'd be easier if they let me ride my bike in here. I gave him uninterested, "Yep, I bet," while trying to figure out if I wanted plain or sour cream chips. Kind of random, but wills do make things easier, I guess. But my bike's a Harley, so what the fuck? I'm trying to make sense of what was said and shoot him a confused look like, in what universe would that be at all helpful or practical? I can't think if he's just on the spectrum somewhere or if this is some weird flex like, I have a Harley, to brag. Just why? Or a totally oblivious to what's happening. And I'm like, oh, thank God. I grab a bag of chips, throw it in the cart, and begin to turn to walk over when the dude doubles down. Want to see what happens when I'm left unsupervised? Absolutely not. He starts rummaging around in his coat, with his arms full of groceries for his phone, and I very quickly give a firm, no, and start to walk away because this was rapidly devolving into something I would rather let a rabid weasel chew on my face than to be a part of. At best, it's something I don't care about. At worst, I'm probably going to get flashed a dick pic. I got a puppy. Okay. We have ascended to windowless, unmarked van levels of creep. Honey? My wife turns around and starts walking back to meet me, looking concerned. He mutters, "Have a good night," and removes himself from the area with a noticeable swiftness. They asked what happened, so I repeated what he had said. They looked just as confused and disturbed as I felt. I really want to believe that he didn't have malicious intent, that maybe he was just unfortunately naturally unsettling, but at the same time, that was a fucking weird conversation to have with a complete stranger, let alone someone who was obviously with their partner. We're one of those gross PDA couples that hold hands everywhere and actively trying to shop. I definitely did not feel comfortable, and I was weirded out enough that I didn't even notice I had grabbed the wrong chips until we got home, which is honestly just insult to injury. And there you have it, my beautiful embers. That brings a close to these true creepy encounters. To the subscribers, thank you so much for your support. I appreciate you more than I could put into words. To all of the newbies and peekaboos, thank you so much for checking out the channel. I hope that you will join the family. Without you all, I would not have a voice and there would not be a Back to Ashes. Thank you all so much. I can only say it so many times. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these selections. Until next time, please stay safe out there and always stay vigilant. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.